This video is brought to you with the support of TrueFire. Learn, practice, and play with TrueFire. Hi, this is Keith Williams. Welcome to 5-Watt World. We're interested in helping you get the most music from the least gear. This video is a little different in that it's about building my new Deluxe Reverb over Labor Day weekend with my old friend Dan at FYD Amps. And while I'm on the subject, Dan would probably want me to say that he is out of the amp building business, doing just repairs these days while playing as many gigs and open mic nights as he can, enjoying the great music scene that they have up in Burlington, Vermont. I'd built a dozen or more amplifiers back when I lived in Vermont. I've long believed that a Deluxe Reverb is the perfect all-around amp. Not too big, not too heavy, not too loud, but loud enough for most gigs. But for all these reasons, the vintage ones have become too expensive for a humble YouTuber like myself. So having built amps in the past, and loving as I do the good people at Mojo Tone, where they've built most of the cabs for me in the recent years, I went online to see if they had a Deluxe Reverb style kit, and they did. Well, they still do. So I ordered one up. I built amps, yes, but that was 10 years ago now. And they were all when I lived in Burlington, Vermont, around the corner from my good friend Dan at FYD. Dan had been my amp building Yoda, encouraging my creativity while extolling me to embrace tradition at the same time. He took my ideas, designed the amps, encouraged the build, and then made them run when I was done. So when I ordered the Mojo Tone kit, I was smart enough to have them send it directly to Dan in Vermont. That was back in 2021. I told myself that I'd find the time to go there and build it with my old friend, that we'd have the long-missed amp hang over an amp project that distance had precluded. And then time passed, and it didn't get done. I didn't find or make the time needed to get away for the days that it would take. I often talk about the importance of other people in our lives over the pile of gear collected, about how we can distract ourselves in collecting stuff instead of making the time to spend with the folks that have made the most difference in our lives. But like most people, I hadn't done it yet either, and it weighed on my mind, like something that keeps getting pushed down on the to-do list and never quite makes it back to the top. So when my fiance had made plans with her daughter for Labor Day weekend, I saw the opening. I called Dan and checked with him, and time to go to Vermont, and put the things together in one weekend. And of course, I knew I'd want to take all of you with me. So if you enjoy watching an amp being built by two old friends, or maybe it's the sort of thing you've been trying to find time to do yourself, then stick around and enjoy the journey of the Labor Day Deluxe Reverb here on 5-Watt World. It's about 5 hours from where I live in Syracuse back to Burlington. It's a drive I've done dozens of times when I lived there, traveling back to see my family in upstate New York. I got there about 12:30. Dan's an early riser, so I wasn't surprised to see that he'd been working on it all morning. He'd nearly completed populating the board, which is to say, putting all the parts on the provided vintage-style circuit board that came with the kit. He'd left the normal channel preamp undone because we still wanted to decide what special sauce we might have on that normal channel compared to the vibrato channel, so he'd held off until I arrived. Dan's been working on amps for over 30 years, so he's collected some very choice parts over that time. So we were going to be able to stir in some 60s appropriate, blue molded capacitors. Dan suggested we build a fatter and warmer first channel, so a trio of 0.047 microfarad capacitors were used, and a wee bit fatter mid-range resistor were installed there. By that point, he was ready for a break, so the first stop was to go fuel up at the locally famous Al's French Fries for burgers and shakes before heading back for me to get my hands dirty. Anyone that's done a build like this knows how much time and frustration comes from bolting all the parts to the chassis. Tube sockets go on with tiny bolts and nuts. The kit had sat in Dan's shop for 3 years, and we'd never done a parts inventory on the kit, but we discovered that we were short one 9-pin socket. So in the end, we put a ceramic in the first and second positions. Then the transformers, heavy and unwieldy, go on. Here again was something special. I knew that Dan had an original output transformer from a 1964 Deluxe Reverb sitting on his shelf ever since I'd known him, so at least for 20 years. He'd always held it in reserve in case someone came in with a vintage amp where the OT was blown. But now that he's paring back on the amount of repairs he's doing, and given the special Forever amp we were building, he gladly contributed to the project, and I bolted that bit of mojo into the Labor Day Deluxe. The choke and reverb transformers were bolted on next. Rubber grommets were installed and the correct wires were fed to where they'd be needed in the circuit. Next, I installed the backplate, the RCA jacks for the reverb send and return, and the foot switch for the reverb and tremolo, the speaker output jack and external speaker jack, the power switches, and the fuse holder. The faceplate went on with all the pots in the correct spots, and the light was installed with a special bulb so it wouldn't be as ungodly bright. Last, I put in the bias pot. While he was doing that, Dan had put together the filter cap board. And that was the day. When I lived in Vermont, I'd had a special relationship with the folks that owned an amazing restaurant called Misery Loves Company. I ate lunch there every day for about 3 years. So I'd made reservations at their new place, Onion City Chicken and Oyster. It was as good as I remembered, and it was great to see the owner. The next morning, we were ready to start putting it together. In the old days, I'd go to a local shop for coffee and croissants for the Saturday morning amp hang. So in keeping with tradition, I showed up with caffeine and sugar, just like old times. We'd made the decision to add a post-phase inverter master volume, giving up the external speaker jack to this purpose. So Dan modified the board to this end. I built the little bias board to kill time. At this point of the project, you can really only have one set of hands in the amp, and I wasn't confused about which set of hands those should be. So Dan built, and I kept him company. We talked about exercise, meditation, other old friends, aging parents, music, guitars, and amps. Dan fitted the board, and we drilled 2 holes to bolt it to the chassis. Dan likes to build from the power end first. I stayed busy trying to get good shots of soldering smoke. Here you can see the power tubes are all wired up. The green and gray are the heater wires. You'll see Dan do those as he comes to each subsequent tube, so they aren't in the way for wiring the socket. Then, at the end of the day, the tube sockets were all installed and connected to the board. The white wire with red stripes is making a connection so that we can have reverb and tremolo on both channels. And we ran a drill through the input holes to remove any burrs and make it easier for the pre-assembled jacks to be installed. The next morning, Dan was wiring up the pots. Tight work, difficult to film. And then we were ready to turn it on.
Good. I'm testing for shorts. Where all the power supply ones are. All the power supply nodes are. I learned to do that. It saves time. I think we're good. We got these in there, right? We did everything. Oh, these cheap shits.
Tops came off?
Yeah, right?
I told you I was going to change those out.
Yeah, I know. All right, that's good. All right, here we go.
I should just leave them here with you.
If you want to, yeah, when after you're done.
You could use some, yeah.
Yeah, if I have enough, there's always one missing from some customers.
Yeah.
The
light bulb tests let you know if you have a short in the build without the potential for damaging the amp. The light bulb sort of absorbs any pain.
Here we go. On. Oh, wait. Speaker. Speaker. That should be all full up or full down.
You don't have a tube. You don't have a fuse in it.
Yes, I do.
Oh, you did? You put a fuse? Okay.
I grabbed it. Oh, it's right there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I found it over there.
I just wasn't there.
All right. Yes, that's a good start. Just keep an eye on that. You got it. You got.
Yep.
Looking there.
Boy. I got it in frame.
I don't know. Or maybe no. I'm looking to see. Oops. All right. Initial voltage. 410, 415, 420. Holy crap. Keeps it going. That's all right. That's all right. We don't put a load on it yet. It's like free running right now. It's really funny. So it's taking so long. Slow turn on GZ34. Get this off. All right, ready? I can't be happier. Ooh, it's hot. It's running hot at low voltage. See that?
Mm-hmm.
See it goes dim?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that cool? Watch. So drawing current, everything changes. All right, so now what we need to do is go full power. After I check high voltage again. Good. Bam! Nice. 435. No bias yet. Nothing like the first time. Wait, you want to hear it? All right, this is the biggest test. I hear nothing. I hear nothing. Uh-oh. I did it backwards. That doesn't sound good.
Yeah, crazy noisy.
Something's wrong. All right, turn it off.
I think that ending sort of speaks for itself. Something clearly wasn't right, and I laughed when I watched the video where Dan says, "Turn it off," because he'd been telling me to stop filming, not to turn off the amp. Dan said that the buzz sounded like an issue with the heaters. We stared down in the amp for a while. I mean, a long while. Following Dan's hunch, we finally checked the heater circuit at the pilot light and found that we'd installed 1 meg-ohm instead of 100 ohm resistors there, the difference of which is a single color on the resistor. Swapping them out fixed the buzz in the heaters. But then we weren't getting the volume we should. It just wasn't loud enough, and we spent an hour or more staring at the amp again, but everything looked right. We started checking resistor values and realized that the resistors that I'd used when I built the input jacks were the 100 ohms that should have been over in the heater circuit instead of the 1 megs that should have been there in the inputs. We were throttling the inputs with a pair of resistors. That one color stripe mistake, when picking up the resistors from the box, had cascaded down to both parts. Once those were changed out, we tested the amp, and it sounded amazing. After more quick testing, we put the chassis in the cab and tested one last time. Now it was late in the afternoon, so I loaded up, hugged Dan and Jennifer one more time, and headed for home. The amp has now taken up residence in the corner of the living room, paired with my 5-watt FYD desktop champ. A pair of special 5-watt World Barber pedals into an HX Stomp running wet-dry, and it's a glorious sound. I didn't have time getting this video done to do any recording of the amp that would do it justice, but you'll hear it in the future. Oh, and it currently has a Celestion Neo Creamback speaker in the solid pine cabinet, so it weighs just over 35 pounds. A stock 65 reissue Deluxe is listed as spec at 42 pounds. As I won't be gigging and carrying it around, I'll be testing other speakers, coordinated with David Barber. Part of the goal of getting this done was that we will now each have a Deluxe Reverb for testing the pedals we developed together. As Dan said, it wasn't just mission accomplished, but mission successful. I need to thank John Cordy for letting me use a piece of his playing at the beginning and end of the video. He's playing a Deluxe Reverb, of course. See the description for links to my online store for t-shirts, hoodies, hats, also the link for Friends of 5-Watt on Patreon if you want to stay in closer touch with me. If you want to get one of the 5-Watt World Barber Electronics Bus Overdrives, they're back in stock. We currently have them in both white and black, and those reverb links are also in the description. Thanks for hanging with me until the end. Until next time, thanks for being a part of the 5-Watt World.